So they're fraudulently creating wealth out of thin air, and then when the ones who created it, the ones who decided to lent it to somebody that they knew was retarded sitting across from them and wasn't going to be able to pay them back, they didn't care. Because there's no responsibility for them. They're going to go home and eat. They're going to get paid. The bank's going to get paid. The government's going to get paid. The teachers are going to get paid. The school's going to get paid. The only one that's going to get screwed is you.
We are living in an artificially induced state of consciousness that resembles sleep. The poor and the underclass are growing. Racial justice and human rights are non-existent. We have been lulled into a trance. They have made us indifferent to ourselves, to others. We are focused only on our own gain. That is their primary method of survival. Keep us asleep, keep us selfish, keep us sedated.
You're listening to Toward Anarchy on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Here's your host, Michael Storm.
Listening in. I'm Michael Storm. It's Saturday night. We're prime time all around the world right here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram and X and even TikTok, maybe, if you dig really, really deeply, at Toward Anarchy, everywhere you find us and wherever you find me. Please click that like button. It just takes a quick second to just tap that bad boy, whether it's with your finger or through the mouse with your finger. Magic, telepathy, just click it. You can follow along at Toward Anarchy as towardanarchy.com. As always, if you're trying to keep up, it's going to be episode 2514 as we dive into it. There's so much to talk about today. It's crazy. It's just been a crazy week. It's been a crazy year. It's been wonderful. It's been good. It's all been fantastic, and I'm still looking forward to the rest of my year. I'm not trying to bail out already like some people are. Some people are already looking, let's say about 4 years down the road from now. It just happens to be that I don't subscribe to this idea of I have to wait around for change, or I have to wait around until something changes for me to get out there and make my changes. And I've been doing it all year this year, and everything is just fine. I hope you're feeling the same way. I hope you're experiencing success in your life. I truly do. It's one thing that oftentimes when you're talking to libertarians and anarchists, even Republicans to a lesser extent, or actually what I would say would be to a greater extent, you get this impression that they don't care about other people, that they're all on this kick of you just have to pull up your bootstraps, as that to say. You just pull up your boots and get back out there into the field, I guess is what they're saying. I'm pretty sure they're wanting us all to be picking cotton, basically. It's been a fantastic week, and I have a great conversation with Dr. Dean Lloyd coming up at the top of the hour. You're really going to like this one. It's sort of the wrap-up, I suppose, the last part of the conversation about Infallible Tools that we've been having, and it's a good one. It's a really good one, and it just applies to so much in our lives, the things that we talk about in the terms of general health and mental health that Dr. Lloyd and I have conversations about every week. Go to towardanarchy.com to follow along, and while you're there, there's all sorts of different buttons and things that you can click on. Boy, that was somebody almost. I didn't hear the crunch. All just the. I'm at the store, and we have a great corner the position on the corner. We're right there on a major street, and so we hear and see some very interesting things right outside our door when it comes to traffic, and it's a little bit early in the morning to be hearing too many screeches, but no bang. So at towardanarchy.com, there's a whole bunch of buttons and places and things that you can find and wander around through, dig through while you're there, including previous episodes. But the one that I want to point you to right now is the one that says listen, because if you click on that one and then you click on listen on RBN, that little link that's right there, it takes you to the RBN website. That's the republicbroadcasting.org website, and I just want to ask you to support the network. It's a very selfish thing that I know it's not. It's actually I'm just such a small part of the network, and yet I insist that you support the network if you can. Just go to republicbroadcasting.org. Over on the left-hand side, you click that donate button, and a couple of clicks after that, you've made your donation, and it's as simple as that. Otherwise, give us a call, 800-724-2719, extension 3. Speak to somebody there about different ways that you can support the network, and if you're of a mind to just do it and get it done right now, you want to drop a check in the mail, that's doable. RBN 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. Please support the network. You can visit shoprbn.com too. That's the win-win. You support the advertisers who advertise across the network simply by buying the products and services that they advertise across the network. Wow, that's amazing how that works out. Really, truly fantastic win-win situation, and I hope that you take advantage of it, because there really are some fantastic products on the shoprbn.com website, but then on republicbroadcasting.org, all of the information and tools. It's one of these things. It's a website that's been there for years, and there are hundreds and hundreds of hours of recordings and conversations and talk, and it's all made possible by you guys, and we couldn't continue to do it if it wasn't for you. So please support the network. republicbroadcasting.org is where you go to do that. And back at towardanarchy.com, if you want to follow along, it's episode 2514, and I'm not going to get too distracted. I don't want to go too far away from the conversation today, because I think it's important. I think it's becoming more and more important every single day as we slip more and more into socialist fascism and our rights, such that they are just disappearing. They're just fading away into nothing. There is nothing that will destroy liberty more than a prevailing opinion that it is better tamely to submit than nobly assert and vindicate our privileges. And that was James Otis Jr. that said that. And it's a really good quote for what I want to talk about today, because the question came up this week about your rights, and in particular your Fifth Amendment rights. And so I run around in these audit communities, these auditors. You've seen these guys. These are the guys that stand out on the street with the camera and ultimately try to antagonize somebody into violating their rights so they can explain to them that, well, the very simple notion that without a victim there's no crime, that you have no authority over us, that we can do things like take pictures out in the open, even of sensitive, I'm doing the quotes thing there, even of sensitive places from a public space where you can see what you can see, and that's perfectly legal. It's First Amendment and Second Amendment audits, generally speaking, and they'll go into like a library or a courthouse, some public property or something like that, and they'll take pictures and they'll wander around and generally just kind of be annoying, but not really, because what really happens is that they're not doing anything to anyone. They're not doing anything to anyone, and they're not doing anything that isn't illegal, that is illegal, and so they're they're blameless and they should be left alone, but people don't leave them alone. People insist themselves upon them. And say they'll go into post offices. That's a big one, because it's been made very clear that in all of these public spaces, post offices included, not just the buildings downtown or whatever, that in all of the public areas of those spaces, all of your rights exist. Surprise, surprise. That includes the right to record things and to use your camera, as long as you don't go into clearly posted places that say keep out, that sort of thing, and that those clearly posted places that you have to keep out of are secure, that you can't just accidentally wander through into one of them, that you can't just accidentally turn your camera around and catch somebody's computer screen, for instance, and catch maybe somebody's private information on the computer. So you're talking about the state, you're talking about state services, public services, and they're providing public services for normal people out here, us, and there's private information, and there's all these protections, and just the general sense that you should leave other people's private information alone, that it shouldn't be visible and public and out in the open, generally speaking. But what'll happen is, they'll be standing outside a public building or even a private building. This is one of the things that really gets people riled up with some of these auditors. They'll be outside the building. They'll be on a public street. They'll be doing nothing that is illegal at all, and they'll walk past the public building or whatever, and the window will be open. There'll be a curtain open, something like that. Nothing is closing, nothing is blocking the window. Anybody that walks by can see what's there, and there'll be some fool that has a computer screen open or something, and they have their documents out on their desk, something like that, and they're right there open and visible in the window, and they will get pissed off, and they'll go out there and scream at them, and they'll call the cops, and they'll tell them that you can't be taking pictures inside my window, and you can't do this and that and everything. And when the reality is that they absolutely can. There's nothing that stops them from doing. It's your moron, foolish attempt to get sunlight that day, I don't know, with documents and sensitive information showing through an open window. These are the kind of things that will happen, and there'll be these questions about whether these are legitimate, valid ways of expressing our so-called protected rights and making sure that they're still being protected and in all spaces and in all places. That's what these auditors are doing, and I don't fault them for it. I think it's silly. I think it's a little bit of foolishness. One, what they're doing is they're suing cities and these police and people that violate them, and so it's just costing the people money, and the people don't care. The people that it's costing money don't generally care why you're doing that, because they actually support the system, and they don't want to hear it. They don't, and you don't. And again, you're just taking advantage of the system and cashing in on it. A lot of these guys are, and I get the idea of trying to express those rights, but I'm going to tell you what I'm going to talk about today suggests to you that we probably don't have any rights at all whatsoever, that it's all just made up. And of course, we know that it is, and that pieces of paper don't protect you. But that's the question, right? It's in the question of asserting your rights to know that they exist, that they are there. There's two sides to this argument. One side says that you don't have any rights if you don't assert them, and then the other side says that your rights exist regardless, and that they can never be taken away. Even if you give them away the second you want them back, you get them back. That's the point of things being inalienable. They just can't be taken away. They can never, they're not, you can't separate them from your being regardless. There's certainly nothing in our human system that allows you to do that. Nothing morally. It has to be some legal structure, some system that allows people to do that to you, gives them permission to do that to you. You can't do that yourself. There are consequences for you doing that yourself to someone else. But so the question is, when you're being violated by the police, they're trying to arrest you, and you know they're violating you, or not. It doesn't really matter. This stands across the board when you're being arrested, period. It's the question of remaining silent. And in what way to remain silent? So we're talking about the Fifth Amendment, right? The Fifth Amendment basically suggests that you have the right to remain silent, and that everybody has what's called due process, that everybody is entitled to due process, right? Can we look that up? Should we look that up and just confirm that that's what it is? Because I didn't look before I came in here and started talking about it. Let's see what the Fifth Amendment actually says. Let's see, word for word. It says, well, let's see, here's a little write-up on it. Creates a number of rights relevant to both criminal and civil legal proceedings. This is from Cornell Law. In criminal cases, the Fifth Amendment guarantees a right to grand jury, forbids double jeopardy, and protects the right to self-incrimination. It also requires that, quote, due process of law be part of any proceeding that denies the citizen life, liberty, or property, and requires the government to compensate citizens when it takes private property for public use, which is the long version of what I just said, right? Fifth Amendment, no person shall be held to answer for capital or otherwise infamous crimes unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia when in actual service in time of war or public danger, nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. It shouldn't be. There's a lot of problems with that. We've talked about the problems with the rights. We talked about them recently, and the very narrow view of what's taken of them, in that if it's not written down, then it's not a right, or if it's not written down, it is a right, and we're all accept it's all encompassing, and you have to fight back and forth for any of them, and this is another one of these things where I don't have any friends. I don't have any friends in these issues on either of the political sides, because because if you have chosen a political side, you've chosen the wrong side, period. It doesn't matter if it's the right side, quotes again, if it's the right side, because it's always the wrong side when it's political. Because if it's political, it means that it's done for one reason over another that isn't necessarily the moral approach. It isn't necessarily the right approach in any way. I think it's almost always the wrong, regardless of which side you choose, because you're talking about politicizing an issue. That means that you're denying all other aspects, all other potential in that issue, in that conversation, particularly if it comes from that other side of the aisle. So when you've chosen left or right in a political issue, you've chosen wrong. You're on the wrong side of an issue, because politics is always wrong, because it just leaves out all of the other options, all of the other potential, all the other things that could happen, should happen, may happen, would happen. This is a problem with codifying laws in general, or codifying rights in general, is that once you put an idea down on a piece of paper, then anything that's not on the piece of paper, that's not included in the piece of paper, comes into question, as opposed to the general right, the general idea that we have the right to free speech. That's just simple. We have the right to practice whatever religion we want. The truth is this right thing that we have is anything we want to do, we have the right to do it. What we might not have the right to do is to involve other people in it, to violate other people. We certainly don't have that right. There's some question, I suppose, that you could be invited to violate other people, but that's not something we need to talk about here. That's a conversation for maybe a different website. The entire notion that we have rights is complicated by the notion that once you begin to write something down, anything that's not written down, anything that's not included, anything that's not expressly stated is up for grabs. It's just out there, and it may or may not be. It may or may not come down on your side when somebody brings it into question in like a court setting, for instance. If we're talking about a legal situation here, which we are, that's what we're talking about, rights. Rights exist. Our rights, our protected rights, these Bill of Rights, these things exist to protect us from being violated by the state. This is all in theory. Obviously, it doesn't work. But this is what they're for. For those of you who believe in these little pieces of paper, and you want these values and ideals that they represent to work, you need to pick a side on these issues. Either we have rights and they're for everyone, they're for all people, or we do not have rights at all. So, looking directly at the Fifth Amendment, the question is, and this is setting aside all the other questions of rights, just taking and looking at them at face value and what they're supposed to represent. They're protections. These rights are protections from the state. The state represents legal authority. So these protections are legal protections. They are when the state comes and says you violated a law, you are protected from the state until the state proves you violated the law, showing the evidence and that that the actions that you undertook aren't actually protected. Like insurrection is kind of protected, but that's a weird question for states. But rights shouldn't be a problem for a state. All states, all countries, they should be happy to protect people's rights because they're people too, and it applies to them. That's the importance of people in talking about rights, expressing that they're for people. They're not for a specific class. They're for all people. It really is that simple. And if they're not, then we don't have rights at all. If they're not for everyone, then we don't have them at all, because whoever suggests that for whatever reason you don't have a right, there's nothing that says you don't. It's just their authority that claims that you don't have that right. And that's literally what the rights are supposed to keep the government and the actors in government from being able to do, from being able to make unilateral decisions or even group decisions about who we are, what we've done, what we can and can't do as people when there are no crimes involved, when there is no violation of another person or their property. So the question about the Fifth Amendment specifically is this question about, do you have to invoke the Fifth Amendment to be protected by it? So if a cop asks you a question and you are otherwise compelled to feel the need to open your mouth, what do you say? Are you exercising the Fifth Amendment if you say nothing? If he asks you a question and you say, I'm not answering you. I don't answer questions. I don't have an answer for you. I refuse to answer, without ever saying anything about the Fifth Amendment. There's definitely a clear point at which you're crossing a line. You've crossed the line from suggesting that I don't have to talk to you and nobody can be compelled to talk to anyone ever, period. That you don't have to talk to anyone. That's one of the things that the auditors get a lot of crap for when they're out on the street doing the things that they do, because they'll refuse to just speak to people, because they don't have to talk to you. Just because you come up on the street and start questioning why I'm here and what I'm doing doesn't mean I have to respond to you. I don't have to offer you any courtesy in the world at all whatsoever. I don't know you. I'm not beholden to you in any way whatsoever, regardless of whether you have some kind of costume on it. That's what those laws are saying. That's what those rights are saying. Those so-called protected rights are saying that because you have a costume, because you represent the state, because you're an actor for the system, doesn't mean that you're special. It doesn't mean that you can compel me to speak to you. So I don't have to speak to you at all. I don't have to speak to you as a cop. I don't have to say a single word to you as a cop. You can claim that I have to say something to you. You can make that claim, but you can't enforce that claim, because there's not anything anywhere ever in the history of our entire humanity and this entire planet that suggests that anyone can force anyone to speak ever for any reason. You can't do it. You just can't. First of all, you can't just stick your hand up their backside and start running their jaw. So you can't force people to speak. The only thing that you can do is use force to make people speak, and that's where the line is drawn. That's what the First Amendment is about. That's why you can speak as much as you want about any topic you want, and the consequences are such that from the state that they should be unknown, that you would have no consequence at all for speaking out against the state. And it doesn't matter whether it's legitimate claims or crimes about the state. You're not violating the state by claiming that it has violated you when it hasn't. That's not a crime. They would love to make it a crime, and they would love to minimize how it is that they violate people, so that there are less and less possibilities for people to say that they have committed a crime against somebody when so many times they have. So many. This entire question of the Fifth Amendment and whether you have to invoke the Fifth Amendment expresses the entire problem with all of the rights. So there, you have a couple of cases. Let's see if I can pull this up. There was somebody that specifically had shared a couple of pieces of case law with me that, yeah, here it is. Let's see, I'll read you the quote. Let's see. In some situations, police may use silence itself as incriminating evidence. Obviously, that's a false claim. They can say that your silence is incriminating, but it's not incriminating, because the only thing that's incriminating is when you actually speak and admit to a crime, or don't admit to a crime and otherwise lie, and you can be caught in the lie. So that right away at face value, this is wrong. In some situations, police may use silence itself as incriminating evidence. That's literally why the Fifth Amendment is in place. That's literally why the Fifth Amendment exists. I shouldn't have to explain this. I sure as hell shouldn't have to explain it to conservatives. I can get having to explain it to loony leftists, but the loony rightists should know it, because supposedly they believe it. I'm not saying they're not loony. I'm just saying they should already know it and understand it. The Fifth Amendment is literally in place to suggest that just because I'm silent doesn't mean that you can use that as a claim that I've done something wrong. Just because I refuse to answer your claims, in particular the police officer on the street, because the police officer is not a legal authority. He has been given legal authority to place you under arrest with a warrant, or if you present immediate danger to the public, but he is not a legal authority. He has no authority in the law. He does not understand the law. He's just been told to enforce certain laws. And what happens is that he can use anything that you say against you. He has that ability. And he can't, regardless of what they manufacture in their heads, use what you don't say against you. Now, they try to make a claim that they can, and that's what's in these couple of examples, but I'm going to explain why these examples are BS. That's really the only way that I can say it. Let's see. So they pulled up this link from Justia, and I don't really know what Justia is, but it's one of these law sites. And they just go over and all the different types of law: U.S. federal law, U.S. state law, other databases of law, find a lawyer, individual law, business law schools. So it's just a thing about laws. The right to silence from criminal suspects under the law. The right to remain silent is well known to anyone who watches movies or TVs about police, but the constitutional rights that the statement represents are not always very well understood. That's the claim that they would make. It's actually very easy to understand. I do not have to talk to you when you arrest me, period. And even in the courtroom, you cannot force me to say anything. The only thing that you can do is use force to compel me to say something, or use the threat of force to suggest that if I don't say something that you're going to harm me. And the reason that this exists is so that the evidence, the real actual evidence, and not the manufactured claims of police or the state, is what gets you makes you considered a criminal. It's what turns you into a criminal when you've actually committed a crime, not the fabrications, not the imagination, not the perception of state actors. So let's see. Courts have admitted the paradoxical nature of the right to remain silent. An individual must verbalize that they are invoking their right to remain silent. This is not true. This is just a claim. So the Fifth Amendment states that no person shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself. That's the quote, right? The right to silence is among the Miranda rights. The police must recite. The primary application of this right occurs during criminal court proceedings. This is what matters. That's where the application of it matters, is in the criminal court proceedings. And why? Because that's where the law is handled, not on the street. So when the cop arrests you, you don't say anything, and you don't have to. You do not have to talk to a cop. You can just keep your mouth shut entirely, never say a word, let them arrest you. They have to eventually release you, unless they actually have you for a crime. If they have you for no crime, obviously they're not going to be able to hold you. They're not going to be able to make a legal case to an actual legal authority who will then provide some means under which you can be held under law. This is all part of due process, right? And the less ammunition you give the police going into this, the less that they can say about you entirely, period. This goes on to talk about police interviews and interrogations and immunity. I don't know if I want to read all these specifically, but I want to talk about two specific court cases that they mention in here. Failure to invoke the right to silence is specifically what they're talking about. And I'll read quotes in here. Some of this will be quotes, some of this will be me, and I'll try to let you know exactly which is which. Right now, I'm quoting. Two recent court cases illustrate situations where a person's silence could be used against him or her without violating the Fifth Amendment or Miranda. Both involve failure by the defendant to assert the right to silence. That's the claim. You listen and you tell me, and I'll try to stay out of this, but you listen, you tell me if you think that what they're saying is true, that these cases actually fundamentally change the idea of remaining silent to, I have to say I'm remaining silent, instead of just remaining silent. The Supreme Court's decision in Salinas versus Texas, 570 U.S. in 2013, dealt with a situation in which the defendant spoke to the police voluntarily during a murder investigation, meaning that he was not under arrest when the purportedly incriminating event occurred. When the police officer asked the defendant about his possible involvement in the murder, the officer testified the defendant became very quiet and his entire demeanor changed. Police offered the defendant silence and behavioral charge as incriminating evidence. See, that's where they're twisting the law around. I have to jump in here and I have to say something. This is why the state is not given the power to be able to force us to testify or to speak or to speak to a cop at all. This is exactly why, because this is what they want to do. They want to try and find every single way they can to convict you of a crime. And so the idea is that if they don't have any other information that suggests that you were involved in the crime, that your silence is not an indication of criminal behavior. Just because and this is the problem with talking to cops at all. Does this not completely enforce my entire idea that you just stay shut? You just don't say anything to them. You can say, I'm not talking to you. You can give them your name. You can do things like that, but you don't talk to them. You don't have a conversation with them. You don't talk to them about this. You don't talk to them about that. You don't talk to them about anything at all. You play dumb. You button up. You shut the hell up. You don't say anything to them. This is completely flipped around. Let me read this to you again. When the police officer asked the defendant about his possible involvement in the murder, the officer testified. The defendant became very quiet, and his entire demeanor changed. That's what the officer testified. Police offered the defendant silence and behavioral charge as incriminating evidence. It's not evidence. Silence is not evidence. It's not incriminating. It is our right. We do not have to speak to the police. This is a lie. This is a lie to get people to try to just talk to the police. It's okay. Don't worry about it. They're here. They're here to help you. They're your friend. They're not your friend. The police don't work for you. The police don't care about you. The police don't know you. The police are told every single day of their lives that the only reason that they exist is to enforce the law, and that the only thing they need to worry about doing is getting home at night. The police don't give a flying flip about you. So they cannot help you. They are not your friend. You do not talk to them. The court held that the police did not violate the defendant's rights against self-incrimination. Of course they didn't, because he talked to them. But his lack of silence was not evidence. Regardless of how they're trying to frame this, his lack of silence was not evidence of his crime. What was evidence of his crime was the evidence in the crime. You don't have to invoke the Fifth Amendment to be protected by the Fifth Amendment. I do not have to invoke the First Amendment to be protected by the First Amendment. I do not have to invoke the Second Amendment to be protected by the Second Amendment. I don't have to invoke anything to be protected by them. They exist. They are inalienable. I do not understand why anyone would want to suggest that people who make up stories, who make up crimes, who use those stories and crimes to violate people, real people, to take their lives, their property, their health, their wealth, every single thing that they have, and keep it for themselves, to fund their system, why anyone would think that these protections that were offered of us in advance of, and full well knowing that scumbags in authority would try to do something like this with their power, because there's history long before America was ever in place, long before somebody said there was a First Amendment or a Fifth Amendment. We already knew that that's what they do. That's what scumbags who live off the rest of us, who feed off the rest of us, who wouldn't be able to feed themselves and their children if they didn't go around robbing the rest of us. This is exactly what they would do. They would twist the words around and try to convince you, try to gaslight you into believing that you don't have rights, or that your rights only exist under certain conditions. Well, they don't. They exist for all people, and they're inalienable. Here's this second one. California Supreme Court reached a similar conclusion. It's not even close to similar. In a recent decision, People versus Tom, number S202107, California, August 14, 2014, which involved evidence of literal silence after an alleged drunk driving accident, specifically that the defendant expressed no concern about the well-being of the other people involved in the collision. What the hell does that have to do with the law? What does that have to do with being guilty of harming those people? Just because you don't have any remorse for doing something doesn't mean you did it. Except he did it. He was right there in the accident. What convicted him was his crime, not his silence. He was there. He hurt these people. It's not his silence. It's not his right that he didn't express, that he just kept his mouth shut, that put him in prison. This is such a twisted idea of what our rights are. Pick a side, people. I don't care if you're on the left or the right. I'm not talking about picking left or right. I'm talking about picking humanity versus the Leviathan, the destructive force that is not nature, that is man building himself up a gang of a bunch of criminals and thieves and murderers to go around robbing the rest of us. This entire notion that we have rights, you better pick a side on it, because we either have them or we don't. There's no wishy-washy in between. People have the right to remain silent or they don't, period. It doesn't matter if it's on the street. It doesn't matter if it's in the courtroom, because the proof is in what happens if you remain silent. If you remain silent, it doesn't matter if you're guilty or you're not guilty. It's about whether they're trying to compel you to speak and what they will do to compel you to speak. And so the proof is in, will you harm me to force me to get me to say something? Will you throw me in a cage? Will you take away my rights? Will you put me in a chair and turn on the juice, fry me right up? Is that what you'll do to compel me, to make me speak? Why is this so hard to understand? Why is it that I have to explain something that's 250 years old or whatever? It's all of these ideas are older than the founding of this nation by a long shot. All of these ideas exist throughout history for thousands of years. These ideas of the right of self-defense and the right to be protected against false claims within the system, within whatever you call your legal system, your rules, your laws, your country. None of these phrasings, none of these turns of phrase, none of these manipulations take away the very fact that the reason the First Amendment exists, Fifth Amendment exists, these ideas of speech, these are specifically the ones we're talking about at the moment. The reason why they exist is very simply because of the nature of not being able to force somebody to do something, that you have to use force. You have to use coercion to get somebody, to compel somebody to say something that they don't have to say, that they don't want to say, that doesn't matter. None of us have to participate in hanging ourselves. Nobody has to participate. This is just kind of a fundamental understanding, regardless of whether you're valid or not, whether you have a legal claim or not, whether you've made the proper legal steps to go through this or not. That doesn't matter. You can't compel somebody to speak. unless you use force. And so it exists to suggest that the state cannot use force. It can't use the force of law. It can't use the force of the stick or the gun or any other tool because they can't force you to speak. You have the right to remain silent. It just should be that simple. But no, it's not that simple. Even people who want to, supposedly they're on the side of freedom, anarchy, libertarianism, voluntarism, whatever. My understanding, the SCOTUS has ruled that you have to affirmatively assert your right by saying you are exercising your right to remain silent. That's not true. They haven't done that. That was the proof that they had done that, those two claims. That's not proof. That's not proof that they've done that. There's no decision that suggests that there's no decision that you can go and find that expressly says that you have to invoke the Fifth Amendment right to be protected by the Fifth Amendment. It doesn't make any sense. All of our rights exist, regardless of whether or not we are exercising them at the time, whether or not we know them, whether or not the person who is claiming we violated knows them, whether or not that person is in a costume and carries a badge. None of these things change the fact that we have the right and they are inalienable. If we have these rights at all, and this is why I say we have none, because you guys won't pick a side. It just depends on who it is that you claim has the rights. Let's look at what's happening right now for the people on the right, the conservative right, who supposedly believe in the Bill of Rights. They actually believe in this America thing and the protected rights that we supposedly have. We have a very good example of it happening right now. And then they're running around, people on the right, the Trump party and all of the people in charge right now are up there running around saying that people don't have due process, that they are not entitled to due process because they are, quote, illegal. I'm sorry, where was it in any of the Bill of Rights? We've discussed this before, that it said that it didn't apply to illegals, that there was such a thing as illegals. Do you understand that the Bill of Rights is in place regardless of what you think of it, whether you're an authority or whether you're just somebody who is subject to authority like the rest of us? When you say they aren't entitled to due process, that tells me that you've never even read the Bill of Rights, for what it's worth, and you have no idea what you're talking about. Because it's clear, obviously, we just went through it, that the literal basis for due process is contained within the Bill of Rights, right? And it's afforded to all people. We've discussed this over and over again. There's not a single thing within that document suggests that they're not for people. It very clearly says people repeatedly. I think at least 5 times we were looking at under U.S. and it's all people under U.S. jurisdiction are protected. There's not one mention of citizens. There's not one mention of Americans. It's not mostly white people. It's not just men. It's people. All people under U.S. jurisdiction have protected rights as enumerated in the Bill of Rights, and there may be some others, but due process is clearly framed within the Bill of Rights. Our self and our possessions are protected. You can't compel us to testify against ourselves. You can't compel us to do anything. You would have to use force to do it, and that proves that you're in the wrong if you have to force somebody to do something, particularly when there's no victim. You don't have to force somebody to testify against themselves when they're standing there with a goddamn knife in their hand and a bloody body right there on the floor. The evidence should be there. You should be able to find plenty of things that say and suggest that person killed that person. You don't need that person's testimony necessarily to do it. If you did, wouldn't that person probably be trying to include that testimony because they believe they didn't do it, that there was a legitimate chance they didn't do it, that they just happened to walk in and they're stupid? And you see this in the movies all the time where the dummy picks up the murder weapon. This notion is just so silly. I don't get it. If it offends you, I'm sorry, and I'm not sorry, because that's how justice works. When a person has not harmed another person, when a person has not damaged another person's property, they've committed no crime. And you cannot force them to talk to you. You cannot force them to do any... Well, that's the only thing you can do, is you can force them to. That's the point. It's really, truly the point. These rights exist so that you cannot be forced to do something, and that the only way the state can make you do something that it wants you to do is to force you to do it. And that shows that it's not it's not the kind, gentle hand that it often claims that it is, the state, that is. All claims made by the state have got to meet some kind of legal standard when we're dealing with people, and it has to be dealt, fair, for whatever that word means. Otherwise, we have no legal standard, and we're all screwed. That's the facts of it. You have to pick one, people. You cannot have it both ways. Either all people have protected rights, or no people have protected rights. And that's where we're headed, is no people have protected rights. That's what your government is doing today. It's finding every single little way it can to weasel its way out of having to protect you or to give you any kind of say. It wants us to just be chattel. It really doesn't want to hear from us. It wants to give us no standing. It wants to claim that people don't have standing in court, and only citizens do, and only certain citizens with sovereign, whether they have to be lawmakers, they have to be judges, they have to be given some sort of special permission to be and do the things that they are doing. I wish that I had a friend in this, because the left, when it comes to these, right, they want to say that the state has no authority and that we can get away. Well, okay, let me give you a good one. It's the student loans. This came up this week, right? You know my position on the student loans. If you don't know my position on the student loans, I'll give it to you. I'll let you have it. Because what happens? We get these people that say, oh, no, you're going to have to pay back the money you borrowed. Oh, that's terrible. Well, the left just wants free money and free stuff, and I don't agree with that. I absolutely believe that you should have to pay back your debts when you borrow from somebody, and it wasn't fraudulent and wasn't a concerted effort to actually convince you to give up your money, your time, your health, your wealth, your being for this plan, this scheme that they've got going on, and hopefully it works out for you. But no matter what, you got to pay us. You have to pay us. That much we know for sure. That's where we're at with this student loan thing. So this money that you borrowed, that they borrowed, that they have to pay back. Let's discuss this money. This is the money that was created out of thin air, right, by bankers, that in fact every single one of the people involved at the time, all the administrators and school people, the teachers, the bankers even, everybody got paid at the time, back then, when it happened. And the only thing that remains now is a line item on some bankers' books that can be used as an excuse to claim that the government owes money, that we owe the government money, that we have to pay taxes, that we have to pay for somebody's student loans or whatever it happens to be. The value of the fake money that the student never had. It was never in the student's hands. It was only exchanged between these institutions that are involved. The student never had any of the money. Some types of money sometimes, but generally speaking, it's just from institution to institution. The student just comes in and signs on a piece of paper And the institutions run hog wild with your signature. Why? Because your signature is what's value. And then also the education. That's where the value is at. They steal the value of your signature and your word that you're going to pay for this education, but they give you they give you nothing in return. They take that power from you when that was your power. It was your signature and your word, not their transferring of and creating money out of thin air to pay you with or to fulfill that loan with. So the value of that fake money, it's in your signature and it's in the education that was received. And so there was no need for the government to ever get involved to guarantee that the banks would be able to pay back these loans after making them. They're questionable loans in the first place. They're people who couldn't afford to pay for school themselves, so they have to get a loan, obviously, and they didn't necessarily need continuing education, as there's been this giant push to just send people to college because of this system, because of the way these people can all make money and screw us in the end. So you remember all this predatory lending stuff and housing that caused that Great Recession in 2008, and all the banks got bailed out for it. Just what exactly do you think has been going on in the education system? It's just not as invasive. It's not as destructive to the market as the housing thing was, and the predatory lending that happened there. It's predatory lending. They're lending to people who are knowingly unlikely able to pay back their debt. They know this because they're having to borrow it in the first place. They know this because they know most people don't need an education. It's just a system. It's a debt system. It's a trap. The institutions are responsible for nothing in this. That's my question about this, okay? It's not like the people were the only people involved in this. There's all these institutions that were involved in this as well. The banks took advantage of people, but they're going to be covered. The schools took advantage of people, but they're going to be covered. The government took advantage of people, and they're going to be covered. The people got taken advantage of by all of those systems and all of those people in those systems, but screw us, right? This is that money you're talking about, right? You know that when these things are subsidized like this, that when the banks, the schools, when they're subsidized by the government like this, there's no incentive to provide an actual benefit. It's just churning people through the system. It said, yep, you got it. Yep, you need to go to college. That's right. Of course you're making the right decision, young man. It's your first decision. You don't even have a friggin' job yet. You've never made $1 in your life. Not a dime, in fact. But hey, here's 50 grand for this year. There's 4 more years after that. This is where they come on. It's criminal. It's criminal. And this idea that these loans should be paid back, that the American people should pay back these loans, no, this is why I make no friends again, because I agree that their loans shouldn't be paid back, but I don't agree that they shouldn't be paid back with tax dollars. They should not be paid back at all. The loans should just go away. That's it. Do you understand that they didn't exist in the first place? There's nothing there. It's just a line item on a banker's books. That's all it is. Nobody's not getting paid. Nobody's not eating. Nobody's starving. Nobody will starve in the future because they set up the system. They created it this way. They're the ones that made it this way so they could take advantage of us. They're not going to starve. They were covered from the beginning. So they take advantage of us, and then they claim, oh, well, you got to pay it back. We're losing out. We're losing. The bank's going to close. The bank's not going to close. The bank created that money out of thin air in the first place. It borrowed some money from the central banking system, and it took that money and it multiplied it by many times and then added that to their balance. to their total balance. And they gamble with other people's money, and they do the same thing. Oh, let's see. It's called fractional reserve banking. They take and bank on a fraction of what they actually have in reserves. So they're fraudulently creating wealth out of thin air. And then when they, the ones who created it, the ones who decided to lend it to somebody that they knew was retarded sitting across from them and wasn't going to be able to pay them back, they didn't care. Because there's no responsibility for them. They're going to go home and eat. They're going to get paid. The bank's going to get paid. The government's going to get paid. The teachers are going to get paid. The school's going to get paid. The only one that's going to get screwed is you. The one who borrowed the money under false pretenses. The one who was assured that it was going to be just fine. And that, yeah, absolutely, it's a great idea. Go get this education. The job market is booming. Oh, no, don't worry about the tariffs that are about to be passed against your industry. That's not important. That's not part of the equation. We can't consider that, even though the bankers and the businessmen and the scumbags in Washington, our so-called leaders, are the ones that created and did it. Dr. Dean Lloyd is coming in here at the top of the hour. We're going to have a great conversation. Stick around. We'll be right back on Toward Anarchy.
You're listening to Toward Anarchy on the Republic Broadcasting Network.
I don't have to tell you things are bad. Everybody knows things are bad. It's a depression. Everybody's out of work or scared of losing their job. The dollar buys a nickel's worth. Banks are going bust. Shopkeepers keep a gun under the counter. Punks are running wild in the street, and there's nobody anywhere who seems to know what to do, and there's no end to it. We know things are bad, worse than bad. They're crazy. The air is unfit to breathe. Our food is unfit to eat. I don't want you to protest. I don't want you to riot. I don't want you to write to your congressman because I wouldn't know what to tell you to write. I don't know what to do about the depression and the inflation and the Russians and the crying in the street. All I know is that first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being. My life has value.
And here we go into hour number 2. More to follow along. It's the best hour, your favorite hour. It's the hour you look forward to every week. And if you want to know more about it and what happens, you have to follow along at towardanarchy.com. Episode 2514, if you're keeping track. And when you get there, you'll notice that you're familiar with the name of my guest. Facilitator, healer, Dr. Dean Lloyd joins me once again, as he does every month. He's come to hang out. And if you enjoy our conversations, you've been listening to us for years, visit Dr. Lloyd at evolvingthespecies.com. Check out what he's got going on there, because there's more than we could spend hours talking about just what he has going on there and all these other things that he's doing in the background, let alone the things that we actually come here to talk about. You can grab a copy of Cruising the Epiphany Highway, which is the book by Ambrose in there that we are. I don't know. It's kind of like a little guidebook. I kind of look at like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, only it's like the Anarchist Guide to the Mind or something. Maybe I just have a book title right there myself. It didn't happen today, Dr. Lloyd, but normally for the next few weeks, a couple of months, really, you'll be able to join the two of us live each Thursday across the network at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time with Your Health in Mind. That's the name of the show. Dr. Lloyd takes your calls and your questions live, since we can't do that here anymore. And it's specifically directed at answering your health questions and your health concerns about the industry and things like that. So do join us next Thursday live, 1 p.m. Central Standard Time on the network there to check that out. Dr. Lloyd, I'm kind of not upset, but disappointed that we didn't get to do the live show today, because we were willing to talk about some great things and talk to some great people, some great people across the network live, which has been really fun. I like doing the live thing. That's why we do the one take thing here. It's almost like live. How are you, my friend?
Yes, and what we were discussing before we jumped on was, of course, the upgrade of humanity. How are we getting stuck in the places that we are? And of course, technology plays a big role in that. We heard, we listened to that today. We had to adjust our schedules, but that's okay. You know, we're in a very unique position to be able to offer the upgrade, because when you understand, and this is a big statement here, how the mind works, then you're not a slave to it. And it's my intent, of course, to educate based on where I'm coming from and how I've been able to answer the questions that have been deeply troubling me most of my life. And that is, how are we in this situation that we're in? How did we get here? You know, what is the foundation of our lack of the ability to make sense of our surroundings, our environment, especially.
You know my answer to that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's certainly a major contributing factor, and I'm speaking of government, of course.
Sure. Well, they're in for themselves, and because they're afraid to lose power, they eventually will. You know, they're not run. They're assuming they're running the show, but they can't control the trip. We're in a very unique turning point that gives so much of our realization of how much isn't working, that there's a lot of people floundering in trying to figure out where they're headed. And that's where I want to put our attention today, is where you're going, how to understand our internal program. And I'd like to give a couple anecdotes that illustrate this. But the title of this is the program we're doing here is Tools, Psychologically Infallible. And this is part 3. Okay. So I've talked about being a student of life, you know, that we're always learning. And there are 3 phases of learning: the discovery phase, the mechanical phase, and the creative phase. And you can go back to the previous programs to get the information that I was speaking to about that. And then, of course, the prime directive and the levels of the first statement, that I realize that everything I do in my life is for the quality of feedback that provides to my awareness. Okay, one more time. I realize that everything I do in my life is for the quality of feedback that provides to my awareness. Okay. The second one is, I realize that the more I upgrade the quality of feedback into my awareness, the more I evolve my awareness. Okay. And third, I realize that the more I evolve my consciousness, the more I fulfill my purpose in life. Now we're getting into what I want to speak to today, the fourth statement, which is, I realize that the more I actualize my purpose in life, the more I fulfill my spiritual destiny. Okay. So if I'm asked, Dr. Dean, what religion are you? I say, I'm a man of spirit. I put all my energy into my spiritual evolution. How is it that I say that? I've experienced enough in life where I feel that I could literally understand anything if I put my mind on it. That doesn't mean that I'm that good at some things right now. I've never been that good at making money, for example. but I've had this inner desire to make sense of how people got into the predicament that they're in, their confusion, why they become sick, what is it that's holding them back from their advancement. So these are the deep questions that I had going on in my mind at an early age. So I'd like to launch off into what is spirit. We consider spirit as the essence of ourselves, that which alone remains when all other appearances of manifestation are terminated. Spirit is indestructible, non-reducible, inviolable essence of that which always is, was, or will be. When this aspect of the divine gains reference points as manifest, coordinates in time and space, and distinguishes into recognition as motion in existence, we call it life. When an aspect of life singularizes into some degree of individualistic self awareness, we speak of soul. Now, before I go any further, I'd like to, you're a comic book man. You are, in my opinion, the comic book man that I would ask in terms of opinions on good works and good authors, trends, and so forth.
I'll take it
When
as a
you,
compliment as opposed to the only.
yeah, well, right. Well, it's not that what we're doing is we're collectively creating a kind of, in a way, there's so many pieces of my life that I would see as being a comical or a comic book type of situation, right? Yet, like my med school experience, or a relationship or two experience, or my life in my little community, whatever it is. I mean, we have these ways of perceiving how sometimes we get so fixated on the outer circumstances that we lose our understanding of what we're really about, what we're really doing here. And in the comic books, what I found is that I find that life gets so serious, I'll pick up a comic book and I'll read it, or a book that I find to be not quite so serious. but inside these comic books, we often are questioning what it is we're about, what we're doing here. And my question to you is, in your experience with the comic books, where did you find it leading you when you started to read or go deeper into the comic book scene? Was it entertainment? Was it that you were finding things that you wanted to think about, that they were giving you perspectives that you didn't think about before, that you were seeing other worlds because you were tired of this one? I mean, well, give me some insight into that love.
All of those things are true. Every single one of those things is true. They're all part of the process of it, because comic books are often thought of as a small sort of niche thing. They're not. They're books, just like any other kind. They just happen to have a visual expression to go along with them. And so, if you can imagine a story being told in any book, it's being told in comic books as well. And so. No, I'm pretty honest about this with people when they ask, because I think it's important. I read comic books because they're short form.
Uh-huh.
I don't have to spend a lot of time reading. They're very good information in terms of the intelligence level, what's required to read them and really follow along. The usage of sort of $10 words in comic books is considerably higher, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, depending on what you're reading, than you sort of reading material aimed at adults, supposedly, in intelligent nonfiction accounts of things that use much simpler language and easier things. There's nothing missing inside the realm of comic books that you're looking for if you're going looking for something. That's always been the case. They're inclusive. They're very inclusive.
So it's about the battle of the sexes, or it's about your health, or it could be it's about the excitement of discovery or of other worlds, or obviously conflict is a big one. So you're saying that all those things, when you found in comic books, isn't it funny how we look at life? I say, if you can't laugh at yourself, you're doomed. That we have a kind of we revert back to a pattern if we're feeling afraid or angry or we're grieving. These negative patterns are part of our responsibility to understand that we need to understand that there's part of our makeup that causes us to have these feelings, that a lot of times comic books will mirror those feelings. And when you're reading in other words, comic books are short form, and they're not something like Moby Dick.
Well, they're short
Okay.
form and they require more than when you're talking about the long form, they can spell it out for you. They can just lay out every single word for you, paint the picture for you, literally in the words, and you don't have to think about it. You don't have to give any consideration to the actual image that's there that goes along with the short words, and there you have to derive much more out of much less in a lot of ways. And I think that's ultimately why comic books end up using language that is considerably more challenging for people than just regular writing, and even better than just regular writing. That being the point, is if you have so much less space to say so many more things and to get so many more things across to somebody. And that, I think that's a lot of the appeal to me, because a lot of the things about I don't like to necessarily read for entertainment. There are so many other forms of entertainment. I can play video games, I can watch TV, I can go to movies, I can go to the park and play baseball, skateboarding, bicycle riding, whatever. You know, I can do all these other things. I don't necessarily read for entertainment. I did a little bit when I was a kid, but I didn't have much else to do. We didn't have quite the computers and things that we do these days, and other things that could take up time. And so that form, it's just a perfect little delivery package for somebody who doesn't necessarily want to invest what you would have to invest. I just sent you a book, right, Dr. Lloyd?
Yes,
You just received it. And,
Yep.
and what's the title of that book?
Economics, One Lesson.
In one lesson. Okay. If you haven't figured that out about me at this point, to everybody that's listening, if you haven't figured that, I'm a simple person. I don't need a lot of explanation. I got a buddy that, man, when you ask him for directions, you got one of these buddies, Dr. Lloyd, that does that. You know
Oh
who
my
I'm talking
gosh.
about? The guy that he'll tell you about the tree on the corner and the color of the house, and he'll give you everything but the damn crossroads.
Conceptual, yeah.
Yeah.
There-
Great guy, wonderful guy, but don't get directions from him.
yeah, yeah. You need to balance the details with the conceptual side of your brain. Left, right. And what I found is that a lot of times people will overcompensate in one area because they're not integrated. And I don't mean that as a criticism. It means that,
Fact.
yeah, it's a fact. And they've found a way to identify something that they're comfortable with, a particular lane that they're very good at.
No, we're very much about comfort. That's very much one of the reasons why we're having this conversation. How do we get stuck? Well, a lot of it's comfort, but a lot of it is based on, how do we know where we're going? We don't even really understand why we're here. We've never come to terms with our own existence. So, there's very little of that really out there. There's this sort of spiritualism. And then there's religion. There's religion of the state. There's gangs. There's there's places that you can group up and you can find some sort of common identity or thread amongst the people that you're with, and that makes you feel a little more comfortable. But it doesn't really answer any of those big questions about reality: why we're here, how we got here, what should we be doing with our time while we're here, those sorts of things.
And you can find yourself comfortable in a religious system, okay, because that's what they
Mm-hmm.
are. And I say that religion, the only religion, is life. We're here to experience, and it's my job to, if I'm participating in life, that I do my part by the best that I have gained in my experience and make it the least that I'll accept in my life. I will
Right.
not accept anything less than the best that I know. Make my ceilings my floors. I have to understand, for me, this is not everybody wants this kind of life, that is so motivated by understanding how the mind works. But it's been, as I said, I started early, very early in life, in the tragedy that I experienced. And some of you know the story, but the point was that when I was questioning these things, there were no answers for me in my immediate, family environment, or my school, or my peers. I didn't have answers that I was asking. So I had to find them. And, pounding my head in the wall for so many on the wall, bong, bong, trying to figure out, why is this happening? What is going on?
Yeah, you want to talk about pounding your head into the wall for years and years to figure something out. Jordan Peterson was on Rogan here a couple of days ago, and apparently over the last 9 months, he's figured out over the last 9 months. This is his epiphany: is that voluntary action is best. That it's best when people voluntarily act together, that no coercion, no force is involved. And he likens this to children's play, how if you want to play, you have to play fairly, and you have to invite people in to play with you on those fair levels, or they're not going to play with you. They'll just say, no, I'm not going to play with you. I'll go over here to the sandbox with the other guys over there and play with them. And the point of that, in reference to what you're saying, is that he is 70ish or something like that, had an entire academic, psychological, and doctoral career, and he just now figured that out in the last 9 months, that when you let people work together, things work out better than when you force them to work together.
Very good. There's your imperialistic attitude, the opposite of that, where it'll be done by creed, by law.
Well, that's what they're trying to break out of, right? He is a product of the system that has loftier thoughts and ideals than the system itself. And he's only just coming to realize over the last even decade for himself, when his system that he'd been in for so long and thought pretty well of turned against him.
Very good. Yeah. And it's interesting how I've seen these academic types more recently make it, because they've been faced with so much dysfunction, that they have to consider other things if they're going to survive.
Yeah.
And the show we were going to do today, which we're going to be doing next week, apparently, I'll be going into some of this, because I talk about, I'll be talking, and it does dovetail into our topic today, but how we are looking at our lives under an emergency. Our situation is constantly under, the attack of, I got to live my life in an emergency. But who wants to live like that?
Apparently, a lot of people. It's something that my wife and I have talked about for years, in watching the other people around us, and compare, as people do, compare, not in a judgmental way, but just in the obvious noticing of the way people behave compared to ourselves. And that's absolutely a thing that we have talked about many times, is about how most people live in crisis because they function well in crisis, which is interesting, because given real crisis moments, a lot of people break down. But these sort of manufactured social crises that we go through, day to day, oh, those, man, they're so lively.
Well, what you get used to doesn't necessarily mean it's healthy.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Medical hierarchies are certainly very prevalent in our culture. And there are also hidden medical hierarchies. And the reason I'm picking on this particular topic is because in my field, which isn't, it's a field of authority, right? You have permission to heal when I tell you it's what you're diagnosed with and what to do about it, But people have oftentimes, they don't give themselves permission to pause and say, okay, there's something I don't understand here. And because I don't understand it doesn't mean I have to understand it. I have to make sense of it right away. I can give myself permission not to figure it all out right now. And if when you get to that point, then you've freed up the circuitry. Then you're not locked into a particular way of thinking. And that is a perfect segue into the fifth statement, which is about that very thing, about how, okay, I'll just read it. I realize that what is mine to utilize in the fulfillment of my spiritual destiny is my physicality, my feelings, responses, the symbolizing conceptual capabilities of my intellect, and any transnormal psychic rates of perception that I can access. Now, let me rephrase that. That's a little bit to unpack, okay? In other words, you have been provided with those tools which fully enable you to self-actualize through the living process. These tools consist of every level of consciousness through which your awareness can focus, along with all accompanying means of access by which you can manipulate the qualities of energy inherent at those rates of perception. Now, I have a question for you. When you were organizing your shop and how it was going to look and what was going to be there and what kind of people you were going to attract and how you're going to advertise and what you were going to charge and all these kinds of things, you had a kind of desire to organize things so that it would go in a manner that you perceived as being successful. Am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You wanted a successful outcome. So you put all this.
We could have used D20s and just rolled on actuary tables and stuff and tried to do it that way. But I think generally having a relatively clear picture of who it is we're serving and what we're serving up makes that move a little smoother.
Okay, excellent. Then, okay, so you took your circumstance, you saw what was available to you, you made best use that you could at the time of what would make it a workable situation. Now, during that time, were you in a state of having energy because you're not stimulated? You weren't being, I wasn't giving you caffeine all day. You had a desire, you were motivated, but what you did gave you energy. Am I right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, almost nonstop energy. Too much energy.
Oh, well, then I would put it to you this way. What do we have an epidemic of right now? Depression.
Well, that's a lot of things, but yeah.
Depression is one of them, and there's a lack of energy and motivation.
And that's that's a lack of energy and motivation, yeah.
And being stuck. In Chinese medicine, that is the primary
You're in a rut, yeah.
Yeah, getting in a rut and not being able to freely move about. And that is the perfect segue into the sixth statement, which is, I realize that where all of this takes place is in whatever circumstance I find myself aware of in any given moment of experience. Obviously.
Some of these things seem like, yes, very obvious statements, but the fact is that they're not obvious statements because people don't have the time to sit and think about that.
Right, exactly. And thank you for pointing that out, because what I found myself being isolated a lot of times in my field is that I was not so geared towards testing and being overly compensating in trying to figure out body chemistry. Not that it wasn't important, it was certainly viable. But what was I mostly interested in? I was interested in what was making the body respond, what was causing the imbalances. And we look at, see, the beautiful thing about testing when you're looking at blood tests, urinalysis, whatever, saliva tests, any of these kinds of tests, is they give you some data, and we call it objective data, right? It's a scientific measurement, and that's what science is good for. That's what it's about. But what I was interested in our evolution and what it was that was causing these backups, what these the breakup in our body's ability to recover. Now, just as an anecdote, Marianne Williamson came out with a book years ago, before she got into politics, and she pointed out that she felt that the polio pandemic epidemic was a result of an emotional guilt in World War II, and that we had not come to grips with the bomb, the explosion in Japan, in Nagasaki, Hiroshima, that there was a guilt that so much death was created. Now, I had to consider her point of view, and this wasn't coming from a scientific point of view. This was coming from an emotional block point of view. And with that thought in mind, I had to consider, from all that I had learned up to that point, that there may be something to what she's saying. But most of the time, when we're talking about these complex emotional patterns that cause us to get fixated on particular things, right? Emotions are feelings in motion. And feelings, when they're pure, of course, they're not manipulated or forced or controlled by drugs or something. Pure responses in the moment are directly related to how the body operates. In other words, the body works off the feeling level. Okay. That's why you see some people that have terrible diets, but their feelings, and you watch them and they seem to operate okay.
They
but
eat their feelings, as they say.
Yeah, they're eating their feelings, right? In other words, they're compounding on their emotional blocks or being stuck, kind of thing. So when I was asking you about how you were organizing your shop when you were first starting, you had so much energy, even too much energy. What you wanted an accomplishment, but there was motivation behind that saw that there was a purpose in doing this, right? And so much of what is happening, I checked with AI recently, and one of the top 10 is that I think it was number 1, was the AI is being used for companionship.
Mm-hmm.
That people need some feedback.
That's what TikTok is. That's what Instagram is. That's
yeah, all these things. But what we are really needing is, in my perspective, coming at this, and I encourage anybody to ask me questions on where I'm coming from. And I do expect to be challenged, because what I say is that we have to become human first before we start using these technologies to any real degree of understanding what they offer us emotionally.
I've been very clear about that over the years. That is a misconception that there's something wrong with these tools, that there's something inherently wrong with social media or the ability to communicate around the world instantaneously anytime you want. That's fundamentally wrong. What's wrong is the people and their inability to communicate with each other. That's what needs to be fixed.
Good. Yeah, that is that's the root issue. We say in Chinese medicine, we have the root and the branch, right? The root cause, and then the branch is the symptom. And there's so much of Chinese medicine that's poetic, that is it's harmonizing the body, right?
Well, you said about feeling that it's about feel, that our bodies work on feeling, and that's relative. That's what you were getting at, is the point. These people feel happy. They're fat and they're happy. That's a thing. When you're fat and you're happy, but you're not healthy. That's not the same thing. There's a disconnect between those things. Oftentimes, there's a huge disconnect between those things because we do things that are detrimental to our physical health and our mental health
Well, that's
because
the
they feel
point,
good.
is they disconnect. See, this is the thing, is that people will cannibalize, or they'll compensate and overcompensate part of what they want and what they feel
Oh, yeah.
for what their body really requires as far as
Yeah.
nutrition goes, or sleeping, or whatever it is, right?
Get
So
some pills, mama's little helpers.
there you go. So the reason I pointed out about AI is it's not connected to you. And humans, we need connection. It's where everyone needs a hug. If anybody tells me that they don't want to be hugged, well, they're either too shut down. We need to become human again. That is going to resolve so much distress. It is just built, and I mean that medically. Medically, the AI has been introduced into diagnostic and treatments. And I've even heard people have the opinion that it's going to be better than the current human doctors.
It's better at detecting what's wrong with people because there's a couple of reasons for that. One, people don't lie to it. They don't feel the need to lie to it. People feel the need to lie to each other. They feel embarrassed about it. They feel like they can't. That's one of the reasons that we're doing the live show, right? On Thursdays is so that we can empower people with these tools and the language to go to speak on their own behalf when it comes to dealing with their health concerns.
Right. So if that's the case, then I would like to offer the topic of consideration of self reprogramming. Okay.
Yes, we get
Now,
there. I had that run down. We're going to get to that. We get to get. How do we rewrite that internal programming? And I don't mean
yes.
by MMR. Yeah, vaccines.
Well, this is I would say that most everybody out there is familiar with reprogramming their computer, right? You know, that you upgrade to a different operating system, or you get change in software, or so it reprograms the ability of how the communication is done. Well, I'm going to read you something here, and then I'll launch off into your experience with this. Okay. Reprogramming is utterly reasonable. It is extremely straightforward and simple to process. However, as long as your feelings remain subconsciously fixated, it won't work. If anything, until your feelings are deconditioned, this technique would only intensify the battle zone between the irrational fixations of your feelings and the reasoned logic of your thoughts. Also, to
That's what
success,
drives people insane, right? That's how you get
there
a
you
literal
go.
schism and you get a real, actual insane person.
But there you go. And where do we go in our culture? Drugs, anti-psychotic. I mean, it's built.
Woo-hoo! The laugh tells you everything. Just
Right.
laughing it off. Don't worry about it.
So, yeah, okay. So, also to successfully reprogram requires that you be able to still the seesaw chattering of the intellect in order to clearly perceive experience, so that you knew emotional so that new emotional constructs will be predicated on what is really involved in any considered circumstance. Once your feelings have been deconditioned and you have begun consciously perceiving through fourth level of perception, and by the way, I'll be talking about that in other shows, the reprogramming becomes relatively easy. This is where your logic, reason, objectively, and psychologically a philosophic conjecturing finality pays off. Reprogramming is a technique for consciously setting and resetting your mind, which correspondingly will also reorient your feelings and metabolic processes. Now, in your experience, if you could give me, because I know you've had to reprogram, and maybe you were doing it more consciously before, but you went through a split up in your business a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, and you had to reprogram how you were spending your energy. Am I correct?
Indeed. That's one way of putting it. Another way
Okay.
of putting it was I had to figure out ways to try to keep myself from beating the guy's ass or throwing him in jail.
Okay, that is my case in point, that you had some control over your feelings
Mm.
because you had to identify that as wrong, you were being wronged. Okay, you were stolen from, whatever your circumstances happened to be, that caused you to have to change the and reorient the direction you were headed. If you could just briefly give me some insight into how you were able to successfully do that and get a, what I would call, a successful outcome.
Well, to be fair, uh, going into it and getting things set up initially, he made some really good maneuvers. He did a couple, and even a couple of things I didn't necessarily agree with at the time because they were maybe more than we needed to do at the time. But in the end, in the long run, they worked out better than we could have hoped for. But that had a lot more to do with us redoubling our efforts in a certain direction than it did with him making the decision to do some of the things that he did. But the biggest thing is that we went in organized, and that's something that in my industry in comic book shops, there's only a couple thousand of them in existence, and most of them are not organized. Our shop is organized. We have a really good grasp of what we have without actually having an inventory, and we know where to tell you to go find it.
Well, we're, if you're organized in your mind, everything around you changes.
And that was it. So we had the base, some of those base things in place, and so it was easy to relatively overcome the negative things, the problems that he actually was causing, and that were bringing the system, the entire system down, as it were.
Well, then let's talk briefly about something that came up for you, that you were successful in controlling your feelings enough to manage this so that the whole scenario played itself out, and it led you to being in a stronger position. And I find that when we're talking about reprogramming, it doesn't happen. Change is immediate. Okay, that is instantaneous. But the body has to integrate these changes on the physical level. It has to. And you
Yeah,
also
you have
have,
to adjust your clock, get up earlier, go to work,
yes,
open the
or
store earlier, stay later, do the other work that was being done or wasn't being done by somebody else, and that now you realize needs to be done. Absolutely, yeah.
yeah. So, but that's can take some time, just like a detoxification.
Yeah.
Yeah, these things may be, you may be well intended to detoxify. You may have a lot of, let's say, tools that you didn't have before to clean up your act, but the other half of it is going to work and doing it. It won't happen unless you literally get in there and make the physical effort to detoxify or change. But you don't detoxify forever. And why do I mention that? Because it's extremely important that you're not dealing with a toxic body, a toxic temple that is going to be reprogrammed. Because otherwise, and I've said this many times before, is that the body's the dumb animal. If you're a heroin addict, it craves heroin, not fresh fruits and vegetables. It craves things that you put into it. Okay. So the MSG that people consume, they're not even aware that that affects their blood sugar, or their body's inability to hydrate properly, and all these sorts of things. They're not even aware. Well, I just don't drink, water. I drink soda. That's my fluids. I mean, that mindset is a body that is losing more and more vitality, right? And you have to have some baseline vitality to consider the reprogramming. Let me give you one of the main bullet points on this topic, and that is that people prevent themselves from succeeding by adopting anti-negative thoughts. Okay, not that means, like, if I was to say to you,
You're not always thinking positively, but you're
right,
actively working to not think negatively. You're making there's a lot to be said. You go into that. There's a lot of
yeah,
intention and stuff tied into that.
exactly. So one of these sabotage techniques that have been woven into our our lives. Okay, I don't care what country you're from. I've never found a country that didn't have this pattern somewhere in their psyche. Okay, that goes for the Chinese culture. It goes for the South American, the Peruvian culture. It goes for the American culture. It goes for Europeans. I mean, it doesn't matter where you're from. Anti-negative thoughts are not positive, or as you just said, positive thoughts, but they're not succeeding thoughts. They're not thoughts that get you to where you're going. I'll read off to you this one section here. These are patterns of thought which you had formed to keep at bay those negative feeling patterns which have held subconscious dominance over your reactions. As such, these defensive anti thoughts had actually seemed positive and productively comfortable. Now, I'll give you an example. I was When I was a youth, my father, love him dearly. He said something to me that hurt me, though, and I'm not holding it against him. It's just where he was coming from. But he said to me, I said, I'm going to be a successful musician, and I'm going to play an orchestra, and I'm going to be at the top of my field. And I said it I used different language as a child, of course. And I'm going to make myself a musician that is going to be known throughout, the country and the world, maybe. And I can't wait to do this because it's so beautiful what I'm hearing. I'm hearing Vivaldi and Bach, and I'm so motivated to play all these, all the music myself. And he said, "Well, all right, you did that. 2 bits will get you 2 bits and a cup of coffee." And immediately said, "Oh yeah." I said, "I'm going to show you." That was the feeling that came up that was negatively charged. That wasn't a positive. I will overcome this. I will figure out what is required. I'll practice my scales. I'll learn the music. I'll sight read. I'll do whatever I need to get where I need to go. And I did accomplish those things. I did sight read. I did learn the music. I got to be first chair. But that was a
The
desire of
problem
mine
with
that I was.
young people's goals like that is they're never complete. They're never the whole picture at that age. There's more to it than just being good at being a musician and to become like a concert musician, to be a lifelong musician, performing, getting paid for it, that kind of thing is more than just being a good music. There are many, many good musicians all over the world who don't make a dime on their music.
Exactly. And we're not to be hard on ourselves. That's my
Yes.
perspective.
No, you relish in the fact that you did what you said you were going to do, and that you are as good as you said you were going to be, or constantly striving for it. If you're talking about
Yes.
something like an art form, playing an instrument, it's a never ending process. You're never the top of your game. If you're the top of your game, you quit climbing the mountain.
Well, this is beautiful. It goes to the living proof, which is we are walking representations of our consciousness. We're consciousness. That's who we are. And when we show that we're happy. I mean, I have a lot to do in my life. I'm very, very busy, but I'm happy, and I don't make a big deal about it. I don't want to scare people. I just want to provide some tools for them so they can get it for themselves.
Well, it's daunting,
And
right? Being
yeah, I
responsible
don't.
for yourself and being responsible for your own happiness, and that's tough.
Right, and we're going to be doing a show next week. And thank you for allowing me to invite a dear friend of mine that will be talking about the topic, the truth. What's wrong with the truth? Nothing.
Don't know him. You'll have to introduce me to him. I've heard he's out there, but I'm
Yeah, I'll do that before we go on air. But this is another fellow. He repairs musical instruments, and just like you have a Stradivarius, the master woodworker, master musician, or the master musical instrument maker,
the luthier.
Luthier is the title. Correct. The luthier. Yeah, this is a man who has found his joy, his love in his work. And he and I bounce things off each other all the time. And because of my medical perspective, it's nice to have somebody who's musically tuned in. Okay. I would call him someone in tune, that when I say something, he gets it, although he doesn't have the medical experience that I do. But it's funny. I had a patient years and years ago. This is back in the 90s. That he was a truck driver, and he's from the South in Louisiana, and he had this really thick accent, Southern accent. And he came to me, and I was working in California at the time, and he's a truck driver, and I was explaining to him why he had arthritis of the type that he had. There's rheumatoid and osteoarthritis. There's two main types. Okay, rheumatic arthritis means water in Latin. Okay, so he had that type where the weather changes and it gets damp and he gets more ache in his joints. And the osteoarthritis is more about the bone building, calcium in the wrong places, like carbuncles on your knuckles and buildup of
And you
spurs.
can feel that stuff too. You can
Oh
actually just feel it.
Oh yeah, it's
That's nice. There's something wrong.
out of bounds. But I explained to him that, well, the Chinese perspective is that the dampness, the damp environment, well, that gets into your body and into your joints. So when you go back home, it's going to be worse because it's a damp environment right now this time of year. He goes, Dad gummit, yeah, you're right. It does feel like it, and I don't want to feel that anymore. Okay. So he got that I was telling him his environment affected the way he felt. Okay. So I said I was going to dry out his body. Okay, from the Chinese perspective, dry the dampness so it's not as, painful that way. And he got it. And this is somebody who didn't have any medical experience. Then I literally within the same month, I had another rheumatic arthritis patient who lived in California, but he was an academic PhD. And I was explaining to him the very way that I did the other gentleman. And I said to him, the dampness, when it rains, it's worse. And he couldn't understand that because he wanted a test to validate what I was saying. I said, well, we got to look at markers like the histamine, for example, and we got to look at, blood sugar. And
That's what you were talking about earlier. Get your baseline.
Get your baseline. But he didn't see it in the tests that were run. So in other words, he didn't get validation before he saw me on what the cause is. So I had it took me forever
to break through that.
To break that pattern for him.
Yeah.
He finally started taking some Chinese herbs, but I had to give it to him in a different way. I had to explain it to him that, okay, we first got to understand that your body chemistry isn't showing us anything that's visually, showing up in these tests. So we're going to take a little different approach. What's your secondary symptom? Well, I'm tired all the time. Okay. Well, we're not looking for the I know that's what you're coming to me, or the painful rheumatic arthritis problem first. I want to bring your energy level up first. Then let's address this issue. And I got through to him, but it took me, I can't remember if it was like 3 weeks or something like that, but he kept seeing me with, for treatment, but he just wasn't able to mentally get the concept, right? So what I'm saying here is that their education can be a barrier to understanding simple things.
Oh yeah, no, that's what we were getting at. Yeah. Overanalysis leads to paralysis.
Right. And that's why when I say living proof, if you're out there and you're looking for a qualified practitioner, okay, and I prefer the independent practitioners versus the HMOs and the the people that are under maybe they'll do some good for you, but what I am really against is managed healthcare. This is an absolute just disaster. That we're talking, there's people that have to have medications and it paid for and so on. I get that. But what I'm talking about is everybody doesn't fit into the same category. Yeah. We're not cattle.
It's just another way to box people in.
It's boxing people.
Oversimplify. It's a shortcut in doing the work of trying to individually manage the problems of individuals instead of just creating a category of problem and trying to address it with a drug or a accepted therapy.
So that's why living proof, we have to always consider the source. When you're out there looking for the doctor, that is, or you have a doctor that if they're legitimate, they're genuine, they're really wanting to help you, consider the tools that they have available to you, because they'll oftentimes look for nails to pound if they have a hammer to use.
Yeah, well, that's it. That's exactly it. They're hammers, and that's all they know is to hit nails. And that's what you were saying about seeing a particular type of practitioner in particular. Presumably, you're seeing somebody who has maybe less patience, more time, more attention to individuals, and attention to detail is, I would assume, the basis for most of that, as opposed to the necessary idea that all doctors are bad.
No, that's not the point. Yeah,
exactly.
We are talking about emergency care is something that we've excelled in, but when it comes to the healing art,
they lack.
They just don't have it.
They don't have it, and they don't need it because that's not their job.
And that's why when I'm going into future shows in the summer and later into the year, I'll be providing the kinds of advanced tools that people should be, I would say, excited about, because the doctors that are aware of their abilities also have to be aware of their inabilities,
right? That's one of the things that always gets me. I always have a problem with the clergy and with politicians and lawyers and doctors, is that they're complicit or they're ignorant in many of the things that they do, and I find that it's mostly complicit. But in the case of doctors, it might be a good level of ignorance indeed.
That's why I say to my patients, I make no secret of it, is that I can only help you as much as I've helped myself.
Right.
And there's enough of this humility that I'm seeing in my particular circle of doctor colleagues that are interested in making changes that are that's why I do the medical meetings, by the way, Michael.
Right.
And that are looking at using, for example, I did a recent one on repairing water. How many doctors are out there telling you to drink water that's not contaminated?
Yeah, you're right.
Or drink bottled water. Well, you got to hydrate properly, and there's signals that make that possible. So I know that I oftentimes am using my medical background as a reference point, but we have to remember that the healing art is something where we can understand that everything has its place. There's time and place for the emergency care.
Are you trying to say that we don't have to take the puzzle pieces that don't quite fit over here and use a hammer to put them in place, that if you just look closer, there's another place for them to fit? Because that would be a great way to wrap it up, because we're out of time, Dr. Lloyd.
Oh, well, that's why we have the other show on Thursday.
Yeah, we'll pick this up again. All right, my friend, take care.
All right, thank you again.
All right, you got him.